Hi, my name's Dawn Dextres and I live in Claremont, New Hampshire. I'm part of the forestry team for Envirothon and I work for the Natural Resources Department of Sullivan County as the educator.
Hello, my name is Josh Levesque. I'm with the forestry team with the New Hampshire Envirothon. I work for the Army Corps of Engineers.
Hi, my name is Karen Hoy. I'm a park ranger with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at the Franklin Falls and Blackwater Dam.
This is a beech tree. Similar to the oaks, they keep their leaves during the winter time and they have alternate branching. You'll notice that these leaves are sort of sand colored and that makes me think of beach, like the beaches at the ocean. These trees have very smooth grayish bark, and when they're old they almost look like elephant legs. Sometimes though they have blisters on them from a disease that's called beech bark disease, and so they'll be very bumpy but they still have a smoothness to them. The leaves of the beech are your typical elliptical leaf. They have one tooth per vein on the leaf. And I have a friend who says that when you live in the mountains, you go to the beach once a year. And so that's how they remember that there's one tooth per vein on the beech leaf. The birches that look similar in shape to this have multiple teeth in between the veins. And another identifying feature would be the buds of the beech tree. They're elongated and they look like rolled up cigars.
So here we have one of the aspens. This is quaking aspen or quaking poplar. The bark is very gray. It almost has like a pale transition to it. If you rub it, sometimes you can come away with a light filament or dust on your hand. As you travel up the trunk, you'll notice that it is very thick branching and a lot of the branches are broken. One of the ways that this species can actually reproduce is asexually. So during heavy storms or rain events, branches can actually fall off, and if they place themselves into the ground in the right conditions, can actually grow a clone tree. A distinctive feature of the aspens is this very knuckled branching, even up towards the end. Another thing that is distinctive is as the branches break off, they've evolved to do so, and you can see here the clean break, and you can see on the branching elsewhere that that has happened. And right here, this has already produced a clean break. So if this branch were to fall into the ground under the right conditions, it could actually produce a full living tree. Here's the leaf of the quaking aspen. It is given that name because the leaf quakes in the wind. It does that through this petiole. If you can see, the petiole is very slender. It's actually flat, so it can tremble in the wind.
This is the white birch. It's probably the most recognized birch in the state of New Hampshire, as it is the state's tree. One of the reasons why they call a white birch a paper birch is you can peel off the outer layer of that bark really easy, almost like it's paper. And if you rub this, I'm not just going to do it now, but yep, there's a little bit of white dust that comes off of it.
Most birch leaves look the same. These are from the white or paper birch. They have many teeth on the edges and they have them in between the veins as well as along the veins. The twigs of the paper birch are a lot thicker than the gray birch, and you'll notice that these leaves don't look the same as the gray birch either. The gray birch is more triangular and tapered, while these are more regular elliptical. So this is a white oak tree, and white oaks usually hang on to their leaves for the winter. White oak bark is light in color. It's part of where it gets its name from. It does not have furrows and ridges. It's more flaky and horizontal in the way that it flakes off. So you might also notice that the leaves are on the branches in an alternating pattern. So that is one way to start to look for an oak. And now we'll look at the leaf itself. Okay, so the white oak leaf is actually rounded, has rounded lobes. There are usually 5 to 9 rounded lobes on the leaf, and it has a very short stem to the leaf. So the red oak's bark is named from the pinkish reddish color in between in the furrows, in between the ridges. And if you look at it as a whole, it looks like it's striped up and down horizontally along that. You'll also notice there's a lot of lichen, types of lichen that are growing on this oak. You'll notice on the older red oak trees that it's a lot deeper grooves at the base, and as you move up the tree to the younger branches, they become a lot smoother, less grooved. All right, this is the red oak leaf. You'll notice that it actually has points on its lobes. It usually has 7 to 11 lobes on it, and sometimes it can even have hairs off of each of the little points. It is usually a bit larger than a white oak. These two leaves both come from a red oak tree. You might notice that they look a little bit different, that the sinuses between the lobes are deeper on this leaf right here. This leaf was probably at the top of the tree, allowing light to go through to this leaf that was at the bottom of the tree that's trying to catch that light that was going through. So here's a comparison between the red oak and the white oak leaves, so that you can see that the white oak has the rounded lobes and the red oak has the pointed lobes. These are the buds of the oak trees. The one that is more reddish and has smaller buds in a cluster on top are the white oak. The one that is more grayish and dark colored, have larger clusters, a little bit more pointed, is the red oak. These are the seeds for the oak trees. We call them acorns. This is an acorn from a red oak. The cap comes down less than 0.5% over the fruit or the nut. And this is a white oak acorn, and the cap covers almost half of the nut itself. Animals prefer the white oak acorns because they have less tannins in them, so they're less bitter than the red oak acorns, but they will eat either one, and they are a big source of fat and protein and carbohydrates all in one small package. So another opposite branching tree would be a maple. This is a sugar maple. And the sugar maples have simple leaves. The sugar maple leaf looks like a star. And in between the veins, it is smooth on the edges. So I think sugar maple smooth around the edges. This is the leaf, the national leaf for Canada. So you've probably seen the sugar maple leaf. The sugar maple bark is really hard to identify. It can vary from when it's young until it's older, so there is no real distinctive characteristic with it. But the sap, as we know, is used to make maple syrup and maple sugar. The buds are pointy and long and pointy at the end, and they are usually sort of a yellowish brown color. This is an old sugar maple, so you can see how the bark on this looks very different. It's more furrowed and gnarly and rough than the young sugar maple. The other maple on the list is the red maple, which also has opposite arrangement of leaves and twigs. The red maple bark can also vary a lot. When it's younger, it's usually more smooth, and as it gets older, it gets rougher. The leaf has 3 lobes, and they have a lot more teeth in between the veins, so it looks a little more rough, and they also turn red in the fall. The buds are red, and the twigs leading up to the buds are also red in a red maple. So these are the maples. We have the red maple, which is actually red. It's the smaller leaf here, and we have the sugar maple, which is yellow. It's a larger one here. The red maple usually has 3 distinct lobes, and the sugar maple has 5 distinct lobes. The red maple has teeth in between each vein, and the sugar maple is smooth in between the veins. These are a bud comparison for the maples. The red maple is actually the red bud, and it's more flexible if you were to press on it. The sugar maple is the more yellow brown bud, and it is more sharper and rigid, and if you pressed on it, it might actually poke you. This is a white ash tree, and white ash are in a very small group of trees that have opposite branching, and their leaves come off in pairs opposite each other on the twig. I have a picture here of one of the leaves because they tend to fall apart pretty easily. The leaves are compounds, so this is a full leaf on the picture here, and each of those little things that look like leaves are called leaflets. So this is the only tree on the list that is opposite branching and compound leaf. The bark of the ash looks braided or diamond-like as it goes up, and if you were to take your fingernail and push into it, you can actually push right into the bark and your fingernail mark would be shown. So it's pretty soft on the outside here.
So here we have another alternate arranged tree, the basswood. It has this nice furrowed ribbiting bark to it. When it's younger, the bark is much smoother. But one of the things that I like to look at is it has a very knuckled, gnarly branching where the branches change direction. It kind of has a little bulbous growth there, which is pretty distinctive when you look at it from a distance. Another thing that's actually really cool about this is the female flower actually comes off of a leaf-like structure and has the leaf petiole coming out of the middle of that. So this is the basswood leaf. It's a simple leaf that has serration, but the distinction here is that it's asymmetrical. As you can see, the leaf lobe is higher on one side and much lower on the other side. It's the only leaf in the Northeast that has this distinct feature. Another thing that's really unique about the basswood is that the buds are really round and red, and the terminal bud, if you can tell, comes off at an angle, which is pretty distinctive. So this is another of our alternate trees. This is the black cherry, distinctive by not only its black bark, but also it peels off and almost looks like potato chips. It's very, very distinctive in that regard. It's one of the only trees that has that kind of potato chip look bark to it. When it's younger, however, it's a black stem with speckles on it. It's also probably our most shade intolerant tree, so it dies very, very quickly when it's suppressed by other trees that are taller than it. It usually only lives to be about 40 or 50 years old, and this is about as big as they get. So this is the black cherry leaf. It's a simple leaf. It's elongated, elliptical. It has very, very fine sawtooth edge to it. And on the underside of the leaf, right where it attaches to the petiole, there's often a red filament known as pubescent. Another thing that's very distinctive with the cherries is if you scratch that year's growth, you scratch the bark off, it'll have a very distinctive burnt almond type smell to it.
This is an American elm, and the bark looks very similar to an ash, but if you're looking at the twigs, they are going to be alternate instead of opposite. So an ash would be opposite, an American elm would be alternating. So if you were to press your fingernail into this bark too, it's very, very soft. It also peels off very easily. The leaf is similar to the birch leaves, except that the indentations are even deeper along the edges of the leaf margins. And if you feel the leaf, it actually feels fuzzy underneath. So there are hairs underneath that create this fuzzy feeling. The branches of the American elm, also as they go out towards the tips, taper off and become very, very thin and fragile looking.
So this is the gray birch. It's very similar to the paper birch in a lot of ways. It looks white. However, if you get a little bit closer, you can see some distinctive features. The first thing to note is that the bark on the gray birch doesn't peel like the paper birch does. And Right now you're looking at a fairly large specimen. It doesn't grow much bigger than this. And as you go up the trunk, you'll actually notice in the canopy that the branching is dark, almost black, and it tends to be very delicate, particularly in comparison to the paper birch. The other thing to notice is that the branches, as they come out of the trunk, they have a black patch, looks like a black or a dark gray triangle that comes off of the trunk where the branch comes out. So unlike the other birches, the gray birch leaf is highly distinctive. As you can see, that this has a triangular shape with a very elongated tip. Another key identifier for all birches actually are those catkins. And something else to be aware of is that the birches are usually very shade intolerant, the gray birch even more so. So it's a species that doesn't grow long, and you'll always find it on those edged or disturbed areas. So this is an example of a very large yellow birch. It obviously gets its name from the color of the bark. It does have that same kind of papery bark that comes off on paper birch. And when this is not wet, it actually has almost a metallic bronze color to it. It's another alternating tree. What makes this one unique is that it's very aromatic. If you were to take the twigs on the yellow birch and scrape off the bark, it would actually have a wintergreen smell to it. So it makes it easy to identify very small immature trees and distinguish them from the paper birch. So this is a very common leaf for the yellow birch. It has this elliptical shape. It has double serration. You can see these very fine toothed edges on the leaf. So here we have an example of a white pine. It's a very popular tree in the state of New Hampshire. It's an evergreen, otherwise known as a conifer. Something that makes it very distinctive is this bark. As the tree begins to age further, the furrows and the plates here will become more fissured. The whirling on the branches is much more pronounced or easier to see. As we can tell, the branches, they die off rather quickly as the tree ages. And one of the things to see as we pan up on this tree is that the white pine is particularly susceptible to the pine weevil. So you'll see that the trunk has twists and some deformities in it. As the white pine is growing from a seedling into a mature tree, typically as it reaches about 25 feet, it is safe from the pine weevil. So here is an example of the white pine. Again, they grow in bundles, otherwise known as fascicles. As we count the needles, we should be able to spell the word white. So W-H-I-T-E. So these are two examples of the white pine cones that are given off from the white pine tree. As you'll see, they can actually vary in size. Here's one that's just starting to open up. Here's another one that is fully open and all the seeds have been dispersed. So right next to the pine, the white pine, we have this red pine here. It's very distinctive red bark is where it gets its name, and as you notice, the bark is very flaky. It comes off very easily. Particularly with a red pine, it tends to grow extremely straight all the way up to the canopy. Here you can see that the red pine grows in a bundle, otherwise known as a fascicle, with 2 needles. They average about 5 to 8 inches long. The pine cones of the red pine tree, as you'll see, when it's closed, it's much smaller, a little more bulbous, and it typically has little spines on the edges. And when it opens, you can see this one has dispersed its seeds as well. So as you look at the canopy of the pines and compare the red to the white has a feathery, more full canopy, where the red pine looks a little bit more robust and thick, and the needles tend to clump at the end of the branches, so it has a much more club-like look to it.